The amazing 80s. This was a time of some of my first memories of corporations fighting for patron loyalty. I still remember my own love for Pepsi after seeing the blind taste test where a commercial told me that a majority of Americans prefer the taste of Pepsi to that of cola. To this day, I'm confused to which peanut butter I prefer because subliminally, Jif peanut butter affected me for the same reason as the Pepsi commercial. And who could forget about those three elderly ladies glaring down at a coin sized beef patty asking, "Where's the beef?" As I become older, it's easy to see the power of propaganda, a term that is being thrown around a lot lately. In simple terms, propaganda is a technique where facts, rumors, half truths, or even lies are used in a way to influence public opinion. With today's technological advancements, propaganda has become a nuclear weapon. It's not only used in commercials to influence people, these messages are left subliminally in the TV content we watch and the news we read, so much so that it has caused public trust to be at an all-time low. A constant barrage of contentious information continues to wreak havoc on relationships that include friendships and families. It's hard to know where all this varying information is coming from or what the end goal may be, but it's safe to say society is struggling to find its identity. Welcome to the garden. I've been spending a little bit of time trying to look it up and trying to figure out what propaganda is because, like we said in the intro, it's being thrown around a lot.
It is.
And it's hard to really know what it is because it seems to apply to everything. And after looking it up, I'm starting to realize that we live in a society where we've been lied to nonstop our entire lives. So it creates this situation where we don't know what to believe.
Right. There's some confusion about propaganda. Most people think it only has to do with lies as portrayed by a government against the people. But a lot of propaganda has been used in advertising. So lots of corporations, pretty much all advertising we get is some form of propaganda. And it's just holding our hands through every decision that we make in our daily lives.
And it's been doing that since we were
Oh,
kids.
yeah. Yeah.
So we see it everywhere. I remember stories when we were younger. They used to talk about how Coca Cola paid schools hundreds of thousands of dollars to put the Coke machines into the schools so that they
Oh,
could,
right.
yeah, so they could get the kids like pushed on these type of soda things. Um, One of the biggest things that I remember learning in school was that the food pyramid was a complete bust.
Right.
It was a huge bust.
Sure.
Milk was at the top of that thing. It was supposed to be one of the most important um, nutrients that we were supposed to eat
Right.
or drink. And cheese, milk, all dairy, like all that stuff was supposed to be like the number one thing for us. The new pyramid, if you look at it, doesn't look anything like that little short pyramid that we had when we were in school.
Yeah, that original pyramid is great if you're a bodybuilder and you want to put on 30 pounds of mass over a 6-week period, drink a gallon of milk a day.
Yeah.
And that's not really cut out for the typical sedentary lifestyle.
Well, I mean, we kind of show what all that milk does to us. Just look around.
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
so, but when you start looking at this stuff and you start paying attention to propaganda in life, and you start to realize that it's everywhere. It influences everything we do, all of our ideologies, all of our beliefs. And as technology's advanced, it's gotten to a point that it's hard to know what's true and what's not true. We're always being given stuff that we're supposed to believe.
And that's one of the primary purposes of propaganda is in the political sphere, the propaganda is to put out as many lies as you can put out without being caught for overtly trespassing on the intelligence of your constituents, right? So you can say as many false things as possible, and you're not going to be held to account for those false things, but it just makes it so much more difficult to decipher what the truth is that it becomes too much work to filter through all of that. So you wind up in your own echo chamber and you tend to believe the things that you already side with. You really reject the things as lies that you don't already agree with. And that's how propaganda is so effective because it gets rid of the need for thinking, and it's all emotionally based.
I think we're entering a new time too with technology. Ultimately, I think it's made us weaker. As
Oh,
far
absolutely.
as critically think, I mean, we don't have the ability to critically think anymore. I mean, you get into a conversation with just about anybody, and you say something, and they're going to pull out their phone to prove you wrong. Because it's right there. They don't have an ability to think things through, to really, try to understand. And the funny thing is when they look stuff up, who's to say that what they look up is true?
Right. If you and I Google something because you typically fall more conservative and I'm typically more liberal, uh, we will get two completely different set of results when with Google. And so they're in a way feeding into they're just going for clicks, right? It's all just to do with engagement. But what they're doing is feeding into that propaganda by making it even more difficult to decipher what the truth is.
Yeah, I find it funny, like, it technology is good and bad, obviously, but, I find it funny how it's being used now because especially with the politicians, we see a lot of things. Like, I read this morning, about, Beto O'Rourke. He's trying to get the, governorship in Texas,
Mhm.
and he was talking, at the beginning of the year about critical race theory and how it was important and how we had to shove it in our schools, and it was something huge for him. And then we had the Virginia elections go on not too long ago, and Youngkin ended up winning the Virginia elections because he based everything on school, and he wanted the critical race theory out of the school. I mean, there were some traumas that happened that we can get into some other time. We don't even need to
Sure.
talk about it.
Yeah, yeah.
But he ended up winning, and it was like such a shocker to the Democratic Party that now all of a sudden they're doing an about face. And Beto O'Rourke came out this morning talking about how critical race theory didn't belong in schools and how he wasn't going to allow it in schools. And it's funny because he was such an advocate for it. And whether it's
Yeah.
wrong or right, don't even care. It's funny catching these politicians like this.
Yeah.
But they use propaganda, like you said, they start throwing out all this other information that they cover up how they felt before. And people just overlook it and they're just like, we all make mistakes.
Right, right. And you mentioned when we're given information that we disagree with or that we question, we go right to our phones. If we don't have our phones handy, or if that's not appropriate, or even if we do, a lot of the time it's just to fall back on talking points that
Y-
we've been issued from our own party.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
you that's another thing you don't have to think about. If you're talking about critical race theory, most of the people who are so impassioned about that would not care at all if it wasn't such a hot talking point from both sides.
Yeah, we've had a lot of conversations in the past, which is really funny because we'll look up similar information,
Yeah.
but the alt right tends to interpret it a little bit differently. And so the articles will kind of support it in a different way. And the alt left or left leaning,
Mhm.
they tend to interpret it a different way. And so articles will support that way of interpreting it. But it's the same information, but we're
Right.
arguing about this same information
Right.
that's right in front of us, but we just see it differently. And all that has to do with the same thing, the propaganda that's throwing at it. And it's thrown at it so hard that it's creating this division in our country.
And it's really balkanized us in a way that becomes dangerous and detrimental to our society because that kind of leads into identity politics.
Sure.
And so if you're given one piece of information about a belief that I hold, you can presume to know every other belief that I hold, and that's not the case at all. Um, I worked at a prison, and so I know the value of firearms in the right hands, right? Because I was reading up on some of the guys that I worked with in the prison, and those dangers could have been ameliorated if the person who was victimized was armed. And so I'm very strong for the Second Amendment, but I don't fall on those. You could presume to know that you know about all of my other beliefs just based on the fact that I'm a Second Amendment proponent.
Yeah.
And a lot of that division has to do with propaganda and being balkanized and being separated into two camps. And it falls right into our tribalism, our need for tribalism, or our disposition for that.
Without even going into anything else, you like guns, you're automatically a Trump supporter,
Yep.
you're automatically a right winger,
Yep.
you
Hate gays,
hate gays,
hate
and
trans.
yep, and you're full religious. Yeah,
Yeah, gods and guns.
gods and guns.
Yeah.
Yep, that's who you are,
And
just
nothing could
because
be
you're for it.
and nothing could be further from the truth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I same thing. I was talking to you the other day, and I was telling you that I was sitting. It was just before the Super Bowl, so I guess it was almost a month ago now.
Oh,
But
yeah.
so I'm on there talking about how I want to watch the Super Bowl. I can't wait to watch the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is going to be on here pretty soon. I was actually excited to watch the halftime show. I mean, these are the people that I grew up with,
Right,
right?
yeah, yeah.
And so somebody gets on there and they're like, "You're a BLM supporter," and I was so confused because I'm like, "Am I?" I don't even know what that means, you know?
Yeah.
Because there's been so much news out there about how uh, because of who I listen to and what I listen to and subscribe to on my phone and the news sources that I go to, I don't see anything good about BLM. I see them burning down
Right,
cities and all they're doing is trying to steal people's money. I saw an article where all the BLM money went to the Democratic Party, and so
right.
you would type in something BLM, give to the BLM, and then you'd type in it and hit enter, and it would send it straight to the Democratic Party page.
And a lot of that is because there's 2 separate Black Lives Matters sides. There's a political organization that will give to liberals or to the Democratic Party, and then there's the movement.
Just to take us off on a little bit of a tangent, but I've had so many debates with people about football, people that refuse to watch it because of the people kneeling.
Right.
But what did our military fight for? They fought for us to have the ability to be able to do stuff like that. I agree that that's not the stage for it, but you know what? These people don't have any other stages necessarily.
Right.
So they're going to take their chance on that stage.
Right.
And it could be a lot worse. All they're doing is dropping to a knee, and God knows I'm probably going to get a lot of haters just because of saying that, but the reality is our country is built on freedoms, people dying for our freedoms. These people are exercising their freedoms, yet we're going to condemn them for the same freedoms
Mhm.
that we are trying to push on them.
And that brings us to kind of the point. Okay, you have Black Lives Matter, and you look that up online, and all you see is burning down buildings, burning down businesses. You look at Antifa, you find the same thing. You look at kneeling in protest, and that's your problem. Like
Yeah.
you're going to boycott the NFL because they're peacefully protesting when every opportunity you find, I'm not saying you, I'm saying the the typical conservative who is against the NFL because of the kneeling. Yes, we all want to condemn the violence. We all want to condemn the destruction of property, but we can't say feel free to protest but not like that and not like this, and you can't kneel. Like how where is the stage?
Yeah.
When do they protest? How do they Please tell us how to protest so we can get our point across. Like what would make you comfortable? And there's no right answer.
It's a mesh pot.
Yeah.
It's a mesh pot because even in those groups of protesters, we see people all doing different things, and the violence is what stands out, unfortunately, and
Yes.
that's part of the propaganda that we're talking about
Yes.
because there's an agenda with that. We don't want you supporting BLM. We don't want you supporting the NFL. We don't want you supporting Trump. We don't want you support. I mean, it doesn't even matter what side you're on. There's an agenda. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull the most crazy, ludicrous thing we can find, and we're going to post that on the big screen, and we're going to direct your thinking that these people are bad or those people are bad.
And it becomes the foundational point for your party allegiance, right? It becomes the reason identity politics is so effective is because it controls our behavior in a cultish manner. And if you do support kneeling at the NFL during games in the NFL, you cannot be allowed into our club,
Yep. Yep.
right?
Yeah. I have a lot of friends that don't watch football anymore, and I support them, but I
Hmm.
tell them, "You missed a damn good game the other day, man. You
Yeah.
should have seen it." I try to keep them up on it. They don't want to hear it, but
Yeah,
I'm kind of in your face kind of person. So
sure. And such is the case for every boycott that you want to institute.
sure,
And
that
that comes
makes
from
me
both sides.
well. Oh, I thought that was because I was on the right.
No, 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 no.
Yeah, I thought that's what that was about.
No, it comes from both sides.
But I mean that kind of brings up the power of media in propaganda, and I've been looking so much trying to understand and thinking about a lot of this stuff over the years. Actually, I mean, it wasn't just because of this podcast,
Mhm.
but I see the influence of the media, and I wonder how much the media actually is trying to direct our way of thinking versus are they just looking for clicks? I mean, ultimately, it's about money for the media. You would
Yes,
think,
that is,
right?
and clicks are the equivalent to money.
You would think so.
Yeah,
But you see so much other stuff out there that it makes it hard to know. I mean, people talk a lot about how George Soros owns all the media companies and George Soros has a plan and George Soros is trying to change the world. And that very well could be true. It's hard to know for sure. But the reality is if we can break the media down as basic bare bones as we possibly can. It's about money. With the media lying to us, I mean, they're just throwing propaganda into our faces nonstop. But it's become an interesting concept that they've done because the whole idea of Google and Google's ability to direct to you and market to you specifically
right.
it makes it a lot more difficult for the media to just really control us as a populace that way, I think. I mean, I think there's several herds out there now, basically, right? We're all
Right. Yeah,
following a different master as far as our media goes.
that's true.
S-
And y- when you're talking about the media, one popular name that keeps coming up is George Soros.
Yes.
I don't know anything about George Soros. That's not even in the vocabulary of the typical liberal. That's one of the conservative talking points that we were mentioning before, right? I don't care who owns the media. I don't care who the evil is behind the media. It's just another corporation that's trying to make money, and the way to do that is through clicks, is through engagement, is is through acknowledgement. Yes, we love you, and I don't even I've kind of absented myself from all media for the most part. Social media, I still get on Facebook once every other day. I still check my Instagram once a week or so, but it's not like I'm into it. And I don't have cable TV, so I don't watch Fox News. I don't watch any of that. So when I'm going on, and that's not to say that I feel like that's a good or healthy position, but when I go online, I have to actively search for the information that I'm looking for. And I usually go to Reuters, right? Completely, well, almost completely neutral, the AP, another neutral news source. So I don't get any commentary on my news. And that allows me to think for myself and make decisions about the news on my own. And then I can research further. That would typically take me to a Fox News or a CNN, which are both despicable. So they very much are holding our hands through how we feel about each other, how we feel about the media, how we feel about a name like George Soros.
Well, the funny thing is, you talk about these other sites that you go to look,
Hmm.
and you say they're neutral, and they may very well be.
Hmm.
But CNN and Fox and ABC, like all these mainstream media sources, have put such a bad taste in everyone's mouth that how do you know? Like
Right.
it's hard to know if your neutral source is truly a neutral source at this point.
And the way that that's confirmed to me is Reuters doesn't allow comments on their news stories. So no one gets in and no one is getting in to offer their opinion about a matter. And that's so you can make your own opinion about the news story.
You know who else does that?
Who's that?
Yahoo.
Well, I don't spend much time there.
Yeah, very, very, very like they follow mainstream media
Yeah.
almost, and it's very, very liberal
Hmm.
in there. In
And
there,
as I said, that CNN, I condemn them. They're despicable just as Fox News is. So
yeah,
if Yahoo is following along the same lines, it's not like a news source I look to,
sure.
even though they would probably resonate a lot with how I feel about things. You just have to be extra guarded these days because you don't want the propaganda to take hold and have an effect on you through their marketing and
You
advertising.
don't have a choice.
You do. It's just difficult to find.
We've been raised since we were kids to believe certain things,
Hmm.
right? We have arbitrary numbers, and for example, you can't drink until you're 21.
Right.
That's our society's rules, right?
Right.
Yet in another country, Germany, the kids will get a glass of wine or a sip of wine or a sip of beer with their meals.
Yep.
It's okay. It's fine.
Right.
But we've created these arbitrary numbers throughout society. For example, a woman is not able to sleep with a man until she's 18 years old,
Right.
right?
Right.
It's an arbitrary number.
Right.
Don't even know where they came from. But we've grown up with certain things that we know that it's not okay. You know,
Right.
it's not okay for you to be out there drinking at 19 years old. You know, and
That
we're older, Jeff. You and I are older, and
yes,
and we definitely like I know I drank way before then.
I didn't.
So yeah, but the thing is we grew up a certain way, knowing things were wrong or right, because we were told to think that way
Right. Based on societal rules.
based on societal rules, which is also propaganda,
It
right?
it does lead
So
into that.
so when we look at these sites like Reuters or NPR or any of these sites that are supposed to be a certain way, they're still connecting to us because we're supposed to believe them based off of our society. It's hard to know if anybody is really telling the truth out there. And I mean, that's the whole goal of what propaganda is. From what I've read from a military standpoint,
Yeah.
they want to infiltrate you. They want to feed you so much propaganda that you don't know what's true. I mean, it
Right.
creates distrust with your own government, which
And that's all they want.
that's what's happening.
They're not trying to inform you, they're trying to cause doubt.
And where is this coming from? Don't know, right?
I suspect it comes from, I mean, it's a money-making scheme,
Sure. Sure. So the
right?
people in
They
power could be the ones that are doing this. It could be another country that's looking to overturn the U.S. I mean, we're seeing a lot of that stuff right now, as far as Russia and Ukraine. There's a lot of rumors out there that Russia, their goal isn't even to take over Ukraine; it's to destroy NATO and destroy the West. I mean, I'm reading a lot of this stuff.
yeah.
Do you believe it? I don't know. Like that's the thing. The propaganda is so heavy. I don't know if I should believe it. Um,
Eh,
I, Go ahead.
and to take off of that, the propaganda being used by the Russians onto their own military, they did not know that they were going to take over a country. They thought they were going to free a people. They expected to be welcomed with open arms by Ukrainians, and that was not the case at all.
No.
They were going over to take over a country. And so their own military didn't even know. They put them in a room to talk about this special mission. They took all their cell phones so they couldn't get any independent information. They took down the media in their own country. So the only information they're getting was from state-run sources. They did this almost to perfection against their own people. And this propaganda has led to the most major conflict. I wouldn't say, I mean, maybe more impactful than the US intervention in the Middle East for the
Mhm.
last 20 years. But this is alarming,
Yeah.
right? It's alarming what they could convince their military to do by instituting some simple propaganda.
Yeah. You know, I've been trying to research a lot about why Russia went into Ukraine.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of people I see supporting Ukraine, and people I know from Ukraine. You know, I travel a lot, and I've met a lot of people from Ukraine.
Yep.
Amazing people, they really are. Don't have anything to say about them at all, which leads me to something else that I'll get back to. But I'm looking into why did Russia invade Ukraine, and I ended up finding a documentary. I can't remember who it was from. It was just a quick blurb, but they were talking about Ukraine had a lot of oil in the Crimean Sea.
Mhm.
And in 2014, when Russia went into Ukraine the first time and took over Crimea, the reason they did it is because at that time Ukraine and NATO were talking, and NATO was trying to send Ukraine a bunch of stuff to go down there to start mining this oil. Now, the number one economical source for Russia, I believe, is oil.
It is. Yeah.
But so, anyways, Russia was going into um, I mean, they're the number one exporter of oil out of that area, and they supply all of Europe. I mean, we're seeing that right now. We're,
Right.
we're
With
seeing
the gas prices.
exactly. I mean, we're being affected, and we don't even get a lot of our oil from Russia. We only get like 6% of our oil from
Right. On the
Russia.
East Coast is where it mostly is.
Yeah. So, anyways, Russia has all this oil, this massive reserve of oil in the Crimea Sea, and NATO, which is a big part of the US, is
Yeah.
going into this country, and we're working on helping this country mine this oil so that we can lock Russia out. So Russia's got to protect its people. So it goes into Crimea, takes over Crimea, it takes all these oil reserves, and it starts to mine the oil, which is where that other the Gulf Stream 2, or what is that called?
I'm not sure.
The Nord Stream. Nor-
Okay.
the Nord Stream 2. That's where that oil is supposed to be coming from, is that area, from what I understand. So on top of that, they need to protect Ukraine because Ukraine is sitting right on their southern border. We already have Poland and other countries surrounding Russia, to where NATO is a part of. And now all of a sudden Ukraine is taking over. That's like Russia coming over and saying, "Hey, we're going to set up some nuclear weapons in Mexico."
Yeah. Right.
So obviously Russia has a big reason to go into Ukraine. The people that are defending Ukraine, a lot of it is like the bully in the playground. Russia is so huge. When you look at it on the map, it's this giant, massive
It's
land.
big, massive land.
It's the biggest country in the world, right?
Yeah.
Followed by Canada. I just read that the other day too. I thought that was really interesting. By landmass, Russia is the biggest in the world, right? And so they're destroying this little bitty country, but there's a big reason why they're doing it. And I start thinking about all the propaganda that's out there. All we see is all this stuff, all this devastation coming from Ukraine, but we don't know Russia's side. I still don't know Russia's side. I found this documentary, and it was an old documentary from 2014,
Hmm.
but there's nothing new about why Putin is going in. And I don't think Putin's a good guy,
No.
but he has to protect his country.
Well, it's all totalitarianism. It's all just he's gagging for power. He wants
Sure.
more land, more. He wants to take over the government there. And yeah, I'm sure a lot of that has to do with oil reserves, oil supply, but a lot of it is just that he's an asshole. He's
What's the alternative for him, to be honest? What's the alternative if he leaves Ukraine alone and Ukraine joins the NATO?
Well, I understand that he would want to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO.
Sure.
I would understand that he wants to take over before that happens, because once they do, then if you mess with Ukraine, you're messing with the NATO countries.
Mhm.
Uh, and I can see it from his standpoint. If he wants to, there's more than one way to declare war. And a big way to do that is to affect their currency. When the US goes into the Middle East and we say that we're fighting for freedom, we're not. We are trying to bolster the American dollar. Oil is traded on the dollar. And the way that is extremely impactful. So when they started to trade in different currency than the US dollar, that's when the US intervened. And that's when we went in and said, we're taking over all of these, all of this property, all of this land. We're taking over Iraq, Afghanistan, because we want the oil traded on the American dollar.
So how can we feel so bad about Putin doing the same thing with a country that borders it? I mean, these countries don't even border the US.
Right. Well, I mean, that's not acceptable even when the US does it.
No, not at all.
But I can understand it from the standpoint of this is economic security. And that is another way to declare war on a country, is to mess with their economic stability. So he could take this as an act of war if Ukraine joins NATO and he's understanding that now he loses them forever. And, this is like a lover's quarrel where he wants ultimate control of them before they join NATO, because that's going to affect the ruble?
So going back to my original, when I told you I had another idea, we sit there and we think about war and we think about our leaders. What's interesting is way back, if you read about Alexander the Great or Genghis Khan or some of these really, really famous warriors,
Hmm.
they were always on the front line fighting with their armies.
Right.
We're not like that anymore.
No.
So our leaders have to make us angry towards these countries so that our people will be willing to go in here and fight. But what are we fighting for? We're fighting for our leaders to get more wealthy.
True.
We're not fighting for ourselves. I mean, I guess
We're fighting for an
trickle
idea that's
down,
been implanted.
an idea that's been implanted. But how did it get there? That's where the
Sure.
propaganda
Yeah.
comes in again.
Right.
So when I say that we've been living in lies our entire life, I mean that's what it's all about. We've been brainwashed. We
Absolutely.
I mean our entire lives has been a brainwashing and we just it's hard to think for yourself. And that's what creates a lot of this anger and animosity towards one another if somebody thinks differently than you. And now that technology has gotten so advanced, social media has gotten so advanced, it's hard to see somebody if they don't agree with you 100% of the time. I remember early on with social media, we there used to be jokes about it all the time. You'd post something and somebody wouldn't your one of your friends wouldn't like it. And you'd be like, "What's your problem?" You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was just for a like. Now it's out of control. I
It.
mean, that was just like the start of it all. We could talk about war all day, but I mean it because it's there. It's everywhere. It's every
Right.
single news article. But I want to get back to something that kind of fell out of the news. I want to talk a little bit about the COVID because we're really not hearing much about it anymore. You
Right.
know, they've dropped everything, and all of a sudden it's not an issue.
Yeah.
So the Freedom of Information Act. Uh, I think a lot of people are aware of it now, but essentially what happened was Pfizer went to court and asked to keep everything under lock and key for 75 years. They didn't want any of this
Oh.
information to be released.
Okay.
I believe the FDA was involved with that as well. And the judge, I can't remember which state it was in, but the judge ruled that they had to start releasing this information. And so what they're doing is they're releasing like 150,000, oh no, 55,000 pages of information per month until it's all released. And so there's some interesting things starting to leak out. And these things are, it shows how much we've all been involved with this propaganda with regard to the COVID.
Mhm.
Um, I don't want to argue. I mean, you and I have different opinions about the COVID
Yes.
vaccine. So I don't
Yeah.
want to get into an argument or a debate about that.
Right.
But I did find some interesting articles that came from this information dump that's been happening. So I'm just going to read a couple of them. Basically, uh, just recently they released an article that said that the FDA was paid by Pfizer $2,875,842 um, in funding as an oversight fee, basically.
Okay.
And so the people that, when you read through the article, the people that were appointed to this oversight board for Pfizer to make sure that the Pfizer vaccine was safe and effective for the people to receive were actually all appointed by Pfizer. And we're starting to find this kind of stuff in the Freedom of Information Act. So that doesn't really have anything to do with the propaganda piece,
Mhm.
but the next piece that I'm going to tell you about is really interesting.
Yeah.
So it came out that the United States government passed a law that gave them permission to spend up to $1 billion in advertisement to help avoid vaccine hesitancy. So essentially, they bought up all kinds of information from CBC or CBS and NBC and Fox News. I don't know if Fox News was actually listed, but I'm sure that they got it as well. Um, Washington Post, all these different news organizations, they all received like massive money in advertisement in order to get rid of anything negative about the vaccine and
Mhm.
only push positive stuff about the vaccine. And we're starting to now slowly find out about negative side effects about the vaccine. Again, not something to get into because this could be an all day debate as
Yeah.
well.
Right. Right.
But the fact of the matter is just knowing that the government pushes this kind of money into our market to help try to convince people, it that alone creates a resistance. Nobody wants, I mean, people start asking questions when they see this kind of stuff. And it's
Right.
pretty obvious in some platforms when people see it. We didn't need this article to tell us that this was going on. People could see it happening.
Right, and you get I'm not sure. I haven't seen that information come out on my own. That's not something I really pay much attention to anymore. Um, but you look at Facebook and TikTok and all of Twitter, all of the platforms on social media that shut down accounts for false information. And then there's I forget the name of the organization, and I wish I knew it. I wish I'd planned to bring it up. Um, but if you look at John Stossel, he's a famous reporter, right? And his information was pulled because he was interviewing experts, and the expert gave information that Facebook didn't like, so they pulled him down. And when that happens to a famous reporter, any reporter, it's going to call into question everything that they've talked about in the past, right? So Facebook pulled them because they didn't like the information, and this is not based off any factual information, but Facebook employs different organizations to go to look through and tease out any information that they deem is unreliable or misinformation, disinformation, and they'll just pull it. And when they interview those people, it's just like me and you looking through information and just deciding whether or not we believe it. So that's creating enough of that calls enough into question that it makes it impossible to decide for yourself. It makes it impossible to find reliable information.
And people should really start questioning everything they're reading just because of that.
Yes,
And they really should start looking for other sources just because of that.
I agree.
I mean, those are red flags.
Yeah.
And you want to create vaccine hesitancy, that's a quick way to do it.
Call into question any information about the vaccine.
Yeah.
It
So many doctors were shut down because they opposed the vaccine, rightfully or wrongfully. It doesn't even matter. I mean, that's not even the conversation. I mean, there's reasons to and reasons not to take the vaccine, and we could talk about those all day. But the reality is when you start shutting down experts and saying that they're giving misinformation, I mean, they're experts. They're just as good of experts as these experts over here.
yeah.
But just because they're not saying the right thing, science is built off of creating theories and creating ideas and then trying to disprove them.
Mhm.
That's what science is.
Right.
But now you're getting rid of people that are trying to disprove something. Let them do their work. Let's grow. Let's become better. If the vaccine could be more effective, I think everybody would like that, right? Even if it's not for COVID, we know there's going to be something else in the future. It might be 100 years from now,
True.
but we know there's going to be something in the future. That's nature, right?
Right.
We've had a lot of stuff in our lifetime. We've had MRSA, meth resistant Staph aureus. We've had VRE, vanc resistant enterococcus. These are things that people get in the hospital that they're not easily cured. People end up going home on massive antibiotics for months, just trying to get rid of this stuff. These are things that weren't around. They believe that they started to develop because of all the hormones that we were feeding our cows and all the antibiotics we were feeding our cows because of doctors overprescribing antibiotics. We could have kept going down that path and who knows what we would have created. The reality is no matter what we do to take precautions, there's always going to be something else. So instead of stopping all of these anti voices against the vaccine, why don't we allow them in and then we can start to tear them apart? Because they're not necessarily right either. But the problem is because of what we talked about earlier, the identity politics, you either have to believe them 100% or you have to believe the vaccine people 100%.
Right. And
There's no middle ground.
the problem is that it looked from my side, and this may still be the case, but it looked like a logical chain of progression when you have a woman who claims that she worked for a lab for, I think it was for Fauci. She said she worked, and she said that she said the wrong thing, and they fired her. They took all of her equipment. They took all of her research, and then she went on to say that wearing a mask activates the virus that's already in your body, and that's why they were trying to get people to wear more masks. Okay, this is
Conspiracy theory stuff.
conspiracy theories. We can reject it on its face because it's just so ridiculous, right? Surgeons wear masks 12 hours a day. They don't have the coronavirus spiking in them because it's activating the virus that already exists in them, right? The whole thing's ridiculous. And so it seems like a logical chain of progression to start pulling information that is completely wrong, and we begin to accept, like, yeah, okay, they're going to pull this information because it's made up, and I support that because I don't want the wrong information out there. And so you say let all the information out. Like, where do you draw the line?
But that's what I'm saying. That's why you need to let that information out. For example, there's a lot of studies coming out now, a lot of peer-reviewed studies. They're still kind of down below. You have to dig for them, but people are starting to get, ebbs and flows of this stuff. But they're talking about people suffering from the blood clots. We know that, right?
Mhm.
They're not common, but they happen, right?
Right. We know the
But
vaccine is less dangerous than birth control pills.
potentially, yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, we really don't know because we haven't been able to study a lot of stuff. But I mean, that's the assumption, right? I
And
mean,
this is why you said we wouldn't get into this discussion too much.
exactly, exactly. But we know that there is evidence that it causes myocarditis as well. There's
Okay.
evidence. Does it do it? This is a thing. I don't know if it does it, but there's evidence to support it. We need to be able to allow that kind of stuff in. We need to be able to research that. We need to know about that stuff. People should have a right to be able to say, "Hey, I'm at risk for myocarditis. I don't want that stuff. I don't want the vaccine." Especially now, Pfizer's got that pill that's supposed to be effective in helping to keep hospitalizations down. So why would we force something on people, right? But again, even with the masks, there's information that the masks are ineffective. There's information that the only mask that's effective is the N95. The reality is they don't want that information out there because they want to have complete control. And if there's a chance that we can tackle this 100%, they want to tackle it 100%. And I get that. Like, I understand that argument. Vaccinate. Yes, people are going to be damaged because of the vaccination, potentially. But how many people are going to be saved because of the vaccination? So we can't let any of that bad information in. That's not a good way to handle people like us who think we're free. We've grown up
Right.
in a society of freedom. As far as with the propaganda guiding us, if you really think about it, I've had this conversation with people before too. How much do you really know? I mean, you have a life experience, but how much do you really know? If you think about how much you can see, look at how much is going on around you at any given moment. Yet you have this tunnel vision that you can see through. What is that? 10% of you can see 10%, maybe 5% of what's going on around you.
Sure.
That's probably about as much as we actually know. Like really know from life experiences.
Yes.
Everything else is fed to us one way or another through stories from friends, through stories from TV, through, other people's experiences, stuff we learned in school. Very little of our knowledge actually comes from our experiences. I mean,
True.
we grow on that as we get older, obviously, and we learn to doubt, but at the end of the day, you know, we we don't agree, which is why we decided to do this.
Hopefully, moving forward, we'll be able to find more areas where we agree rather than disagree. And in doing so, it would be great to be able to make up the difference between our two parties and where we're forced in those two parties, and be able to find some common ground in order to even have a conversation rather than just shoot each other down with talking points.
You've been listening to The Garden.